I'm Maribel Johnson, 68 years old, and I spent my entire life building a thriving $3 million ranch in Montana with my late husband Robert. After his death, I continued our legacy alone until a horseback riding accident changed everything. When I finally recovered, I discovered my son Andrew had sold our ranch, my car, and emptied my accounts, leaving me with just $5,000 to survive. If you're watching from a place where family still means something, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned this betrayal into the most liberating chapter of my life. Growing up in a small town in Idaho, I always dreamed of owning land. There was something about wide open spaces that called to my soul, even as a child. My parents were hardworking people who rented the same small house my entire childhood. They instilled in me the value of owning something that was truly yours, something no one could take away. Little did I know how that lesson would come back to haunt me decades later. I met Robert during my sophomore year of college. He was studying agricultural science while I was pursuing a teaching degree. We connected instantly over our shared vision of rural life and building something meaningful together. On our third date, we stayed up until sunrise talking about the kind of property we wanted someday, the animals we'd raise, and the legacy we'd leave. Robert had a way of making dreams feel possible, and I fell in love with his ambition as much as his kind heart. After graduation, we married in a simple ceremony with just our families present. Those early years were tough. We both worked multiple jobs to save for land. I taught at the local elementary school during the day and waitressed at night. Robert worked construction and took weekend shifts at a feed store. We lived in a tiny apartment, saving every penny possible. Some months, we barely had enough for rent, but we never touched our land fund. That was sacred. 20 years after we started dating, we finally found it. 200 acres of raw potential in Montana. Back then, land prices were nothing like today. The property wasn't much to look at, honestly. Mostly untamed fields with a dilapidated old farmhouse that barely qualified as shelter. But standing there with Robert holding hands as we surveyed what would become our future, I felt like the richest woman alive. The next 25 years were a blur of hard work. We started small with just a few cattle and gradually expanded. Robert had an incredible mind for the business side, while I became surprisingly good at animal husbandry. We made plenty of mistakes along the way. Our first winter nearly broke us when we lost several calves to a severe storm. I remember crying in Robert's arms, wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake. But by spring, we were back at it, with renewed determination. Our son, Andrew, came along 5 years after we bought the ranch. Raising a child while building a business tested us in ways we never imagined. I have vivid memories of nursing Andrew while going over cattle sale numbers, or wearing him in a baby carrier while helping with fence repairs. We wanted him to grow up understanding the value of what we were creating, to appreciate that nothing worthwhile comes easily. As the ranch grew more successful, Robert's health began to decline. Heart problems ran in his family, and the physical demands of ranch life took their toll. Still, he was determined to finish building our dream home on the property. We'd been living in a modestly renovated version of the original farmhouse, but Robert had drawn plans for a proper ranch house with his own hands. Watching that house take shape while his health deteriorated was bittersweet. He pushed himself too hard, I know that now, but nothing could stop him from seeing that project through. We moved into the completed ranch house 5 years before Robert passed away. Those years were precious, beyond words. After decades of sacrifice, we finally had the home we'd dreamed about during those late-night college conversations. Large windows overlooked the property in every direction. The kitchen, where I'd always wanted to host family holidays, had enough space for everyone. Robert's study had built-in bookshelves for his collection of agricultural journals and Western novels. It wasn't flashy by any means, but it was everything we'd worked for. One of our proudest moments was watching Andrew graduate from college. He'd chosen business school instead of agricultural studies, which disappointed Robert slightly, but we supported his path. We believed he shared our values, even if his interests differed. Looking back, I should have recognized the early warning signs. Andrew rarely brought friends to the ranch, seeming almost embarrassed by our lifestyle. He'd make comments about how much the land must be worth now that development was creeping closer to our area. At the time, I dismissed these as youthful observations, not realizing they reflected a fundamentally different worldview than ours. When Robert died 3 years ago from heart failure, I was devastated but not unprepared. We'd discussed what would happen, and I felt capable of running things. The ranch was worth nearly $3 million by then, not that we ever planned to sell. It was never about the money for us. That land represented our life's work, our legacy, something to pass down through generations. In those first months without Robert, the ranch became my lifeline. Continuing our routines and caring for the land we loved kept me connected to him. Andrew visited occasionally, often suggesting I might want to simplify my life, but I always refused. This was where I belonged. The rising property value meant nothing to me compared to the memories embedded in every acre. 6 months ago, everything changed when I took a bad fall while riding Daisy, my favorite mare. I'd ridden horses my entire adult life without serious incident, but that day, something spooked her near the eastern pasture. One moment, I was checking fence lines, the next, I was airborne. I hit the ground hard, my hip taking the brunt of the impact before my head struck a rock. I don't remember much after that. Apparently, one of our ranch hands found me unconscious and called an ambulance. I woke up in the hospital with a severe concussion and a broken hip. At my age, these weren't minor injuries. The doctors explained I'd need surgery followed by extensive rehabilitation. Everything felt foggy and disorienting. Pain medications made it difficult to think clearly, and the concussion affected my short-term memory. Andrew arrived at the hospital looking appropriately concerned. He assured me he would handle everything while I recovered. In my vulnerable state, I was grateful for his help. I remember him saying, "Mom, don't worry about anything except getting better. I'll take care of the ranch, the bills, everything." His voice sounded so much like Robert's in that moment that I felt comforted. How naive I was. The surgery went well, but recovery was brutal. I spent weeks in the hospital before transferring to a rehabilitation center. Physical therapy was excruciating. Learning to walk again at 68 isn't something I'd wish on anyone. Some days the pain was so intense, I couldn't imagine ever returning to my normal life. Other days, determination pushed me through. I kept pictures of the ranch by my bedside, a reminder of what I was fighting to return to. The doctors seemed concerned about my living alone after such severe injuries. They used words like fall risk and ongoing care needs that made me sound like some helpless elderly woman, not the capable rancher I'd been just weeks earlier. I insisted I would manage. The ranch wasn't just my home, it was my purpose. Andrew visited regularly during my first month at the rehab center, always with paperwork that needed immediate attention. Ranch business couldn't wait, he explained. Bills needed paying, decisions needed making. In my medication-fogged state, I signed what he put in front of me, trusting him completely. He was my son after all, and Robert's son too. Why would I question his intentions? As weeks turned into months, Andrew's suggestions about the ranch became more pointed. "Mom, the ranch is too much for you now," he'd say. "You need to think about your future." I dismissed these comments, assuring him I'd be back on my feet soon. The ranch was my life's work, my identity. Giving it up was unthinkable. I didn't notice immediately how Andrew was isolating me. He began limiting visitors, claiming I needed rest. He would take my phone to charge it and return it days later. When I asked about specific ranch employees or neighbors, he'd say they were busy or provide vague updates that satisfied me temporarily. The medications made it easy to lose track of time and people. 4 months into my recovery, I met Teresa, a night shift nurse with keen intuition. She noticed how foggy I remained, even as my medications were reduced. "Something's not right," she told me one night while checking my vitals. "You should be much more alert by now." Teresa began spending extra time with me during her shifts, helping me become more oriented and independent. With Teresa's encouragement, I started refusing pain medication unless absolutely necessary. The mental clarity that returned was startling. I began questioning why Andrew was bringing so many documents for signature, why I hadn't spoken directly with our ranch manager in months, why my old friends had supposedly stopped visiting. Teresa helped me make private phone calls when Andrew wasn't around, though oddly, many numbers I tried went unanswered. By the end of my 4th month in rehabilitation, doctors agreed I could be discharged. I wasn't fully recovered, but I could walk with a cane and manage basic self-care. I felt triumphant and eager to return home. When I called Andrew to share the good news, his response seemed strangely muted. He insisted on handling all the discharge arrangements himself. The day I left rehabilitation was supposed to be joyous. I imagined myself sitting on the front porch of our ranch house that evening, watching the sunset over the fields Robert and I had nurtured for decades. Teresa helped me pack my few belongings and wished me well. "Something feels off about your son," she whispered. "Call me if you need anything." She slipped her personal number into my bag. I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness, but thanked her for the kindness she'd shown during my stay. Little did I know, Teresa's instincts would prove devastatingly accurate. The taxi driver seemed confused when Andrew gave him an unfamiliar address instead of directions to the ranch. "That's not right," I said, trying to correct him. "We need to go to Sunrise Valley Road." Andrew placed his hand over mine. "Mom, we're going to your new place first. It'll make sense when we get there." New place. My heart began racing as the taxi drove us into an area of town I barely recognized, a neighborhood of aging apartment complexes and discount stores. This wasn't the route home. We pulled up to a 3-story building with peeling paint and a sign advertising affordable senior living. "What are we doing here?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Andrew maintained his forced cheerfulness as he helped me from the taxi. "I've got everything set up for you. It's perfect, you'll see." He led me up a flight of stairs to Unit 2B, unlocking the door to reveal a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with minimal furniture. A sagging couch faced a small television. The kitchenette consisted of a mini refrigerator, microwave, and 2-burner stove. The bedroom contained only a twin bed and dresser. "I don't understand," I said, leaning heavily on my cane. "Why are we here? I need to get home." Andrew guided me to the couch and sat beside me, his expression shifting to what I now recognize as practiced sympathy. "Mom, we need to talk. I had to make some difficult decisions for your benefit while you were recovering." "What decisions?" My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "The ranch was too much, Mom. The doctor said you can't live alone on that property anymore. You need something manageable." I stared at him, comprehension slowly dawning. "What did you do, Andrew?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I sold the ranch. It was the responsible thing to do. You can't maintain 200 acres anymore, not after your accident." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "You what? You sold our ranch. You had no right." "Actually, I did," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Remember the power of attorney you signed at the hospital? It gave me authority to make financial decisions on your behalf." My mind raced back to those early days after the accident, the papers I'd signed without fully reading or understanding. That was temporary for medical decisions while I was incapacitated. It covered financial matters too. "Mom, be reasonable. The property taxes alone were eating up your savings. This way you're set up somewhere safe and appropriate for someone your age." I couldn't breathe. Decades of work memories, our entire legacy gone without my knowledge or consent. "Where are my things? My clothes? Robert's books? Our photos?" Andrew gestured to a few boxes stacked in the corner. "I brought the important stuff. Most of the furniture sold with the house, and I took some family pieces for safekeeping." "My car?" My voice was barely a whisper now. Sold it. You shouldn't be driving anyway with your hip. There's a senior shuttle that comes through here 3 times a week for groceries and appointments. I noticed his new watch, then clearly expensive, and remembered he'd driven me in a luxury SUV I'd never seen before. The horrible truth crashed down on me. The money from the sale, where is it? Andrew reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Here's $5,000 cash to get you started. The rent here is paid for 6 months. By then your Social Security should be set up. I stared at the envelope. 5,000? The ranch was worth $3 million. Where's the rest? His expression changed, then a coldness I'd never seen before. That money is being properly invested. You don't need to worry about it. Properly invested? Where that's my money? Andrew, everything your father and I worked for our entire lives. I think you're forgetting everything I've done for you, he snapped. Who do you think has been handling everything while you were laid up? I deserve compensation for that. Besides, Dad would have wanted me to have it eventually anyway. I felt physically ill, the room spinning around me. Your father wanted the ranch to stay in the family, to be passed down, not sold off the moment he was gone. Andrew stood abruptly. I don't have time to argue about this. Jessica's waiting in the car. We have a flight to catch. His wife had never even bothered to come upstairs. A flight? Where are you going? We bought a place in Florida. I've already transferred my business interests there. He moved toward the door. I'll check in soon. Try to get settled in. This is for the best, Mom, even if you can't see that right now. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with terrible finality. I sat motionless on that unfamiliar couch for hours, the envelope untouched beside me. My entire life had been stolen while I was at my most vulnerable. Everything Robert and I built, everything we loved, gone. Our dream home would now belong to strangers. The land we'd poured our souls into would no longer bear our imprint. Eventually, I forced myself to look through the boxes Andrew had deemed important. Some clothes I barely recognized, a few photo albums, Robert's wedding ring and watch. Not his books, not my grandmother's china, not the quilt his mother had made us as a wedding gift. None of the things that made our house a home. I found unfamiliar bank statements showing accounts I'd never seen before, all with near-zero balances. My personal accounts had been emptied. 45 years of work, of sacrifice, of building something meaningful, reduced to $5,000 and a dingy apartment. That night, I cried until no more tears would come. I cried for Robert, thankful he wasn't alive to witness our son's betrayal. I cried for myself, for the life that had been stolen. I cried for the mother I had been, who clearly failed to raise a son with integrity. When exhaustion finally claimed me, I slept on that strange couch, unable to face the bedroom that would never feel like mine. I had lost everything, but I didn't yet know that this devastating moment would eventually become the beginning of the most important battle of my life. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a strange clarity. Shock had given way to something else, determination. If Andrew thought I would quietly accept what he'd done, he had severely underestimated the woman who had built a ranch from nothing. I might be 68 with a healing hip, but I was far from helpless. The apartment had an ancient desktop computer in one corner. I turned it on, grateful that decades of ranch bookkeeping had made me reasonably tech-savvy. While waiting for the outdated machine to sputter to life, I made a cup of instant coffee from supplies Andrew had left. It tasted terrible, nothing like the fresh coffee I brewed every morning at the ranch. That small difference nearly broke me again, but I pushed the emotion aside. I needed information more than I needed to grieve. I spent hours researching elder abuse power of attorney limitations and legal options for financial exploitation. The more I read, the more certain I became that what Andrew had done wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was likely illegal. Medical power of attorney didn't automatically grant authority for major financial decisions, especially selling property. My first call was to James Harrington, our family lawyer who had handled Robert's will and our estate planning. The receptionist sounded surprised to hear from me, but put me through immediately. "Maribel, how are you? I heard about your accident," James said warmly. "Did you handle the sale of my ranch?" I asked without preamble. A pause. "Yes, but wasn't that your decision? Andrew said you'd decided the property was too much to manage after your injury." My heart sank. "I never agreed to sell the ranch. I never even knew it was happening." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Maribel, Andrew brought paperwork with your signature. He said you were downsizing deliberately." "I never signed anything authorizing the sale of my property. I insisted, though a horrible thought was forming. Those documents in the hospital, the papers I'd signed without reading properly." "I have the documents here," James said, sounding troubled. "I can email copies if you have access." 20 minutes later, I was staring at scanned documents bearing what appeared to be my signature. Except it wasn't quite right. After signing my name on ranch paperwork for 45 years, I recognized the subtle differences immediately. Andrew had forged my signature badly enough that anyone familiar with my handwriting should have noticed. I called James back immediately. "That's not my signature. He forged it." James sighed heavily. "Maribel, this is serious. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about fraud. But proving it won't be easy, especially since Andrew had medical power of attorney. Courts tend to give a lot of latitude in these situations." "I don't care how difficult it is. He stole everything from me. I want to fight this." James recommended a colleague who specialized in elder abuse cases. "Patricia Goldman. She's tough as nails and has handled similar cases. If anyone can help, it's her." Patricia couldn't see me for 3 days, which felt like an eternity. I spent that time making a detailed timeline of everything I could remember from my accident forward. The medications I'd been on, the documents Andrew had brought for signature, the gradual isolation from friends and ranch employees. I needed to build a case, and my own recollections were crucial evidence. When I finally met with Patricia in her downtown office, she didn't offer false hope. "What your son did falls into a legal gray area. The medical power of attorney could be interpreted broadly, and if he claims you were mentally impaired, it complicates things further. But," she added, seeing my expression fall, "there are definitely aspects here that cross the line into criminal territory. The forged signatures, for one. The transfer of assets primarily to benefit himself for another." "Can I get my ranch back?" That was all I really wanted. Patricia's expression softened. "I have to be honest, that's unlikely. The new owners presumably purchased in good faith. Unwinding a completed real estate transaction is extremely difficult." Hearing that the ranch was truly gone forever felt like losing Robert all over again. "Then what can I do?" "We go after the money," Patricia said firmly. "We can file for elder abuse fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. We can seek financial recovery and possibly even criminal charges." On Patricia's advice, I reached out to the new owners of the ranch. To my surprise, they agreed to meet me at a local coffee shop. David and Lisa Thornton were a couple in their 40s with 3 children. They'd moved from California seeking the Montana lifestyle Robert and I had built. "We had no idea," Lisa said, her eyes welling with tears after I explained the situation. "Andrew said you were eager to sell because maintaining the property had become too difficult after your husband's death." "He showed us photos of you smiling outside your new apartment," David added. "He said you were relieved to be free of the responsibility." Their kindness nearly undid me. They promised to provide statements about their interactions with Andrew and offered to let me visit the ranch when I felt ready. "It's still your home in many ways," Lisa said, squeezing my hand. "The legacy you and your husband built is still there." Through property records, Patricia discovered Andrew and Jessica had purchased a waterfront home in Naples, Florida for $2.7 million, almost the exact amount the ranch had sold for. They'd also bought 2 luxury cars and opened investment accounts. The systematic stripping of my assets had been planned long before my accident, it seemed. The most painful discovery came when Patricia subpoenaed my medical records. The hospital had documented concerns about unusual behavior from Andrew, restricting visitor access, insisting on private conversations with doctors repeatedly asking about my mental capacity. One nurse had noted, "Son seems overly interested in mother's cognitive status and legal authority." If only that nurse had raised an alarm. Looking through the medical records, I found the power of attorney document I'd signed. The pages were different from what I remembered, and the signature, while similar to mine, showed subtle signs of forgery. In my medicated state, I'd never noticed the difference. What broke my heart most was finding evidence that this betrayal wasn't spontaneous. Bank records showed Andrew had consulted with real estate agents about the ranch's value months before my accident. He'd already been planning to take everything, just waiting for an opportunity. My accident hadn't caused his betrayal. It had merely accelerated his timeline. Patricia was honest about our challenges. "Recovery will be difficult and expensive. The legal process could take years. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Robert, about the decades we'd spent building something from nothing, about the values we thought we'd instilled in our son. "I have nothing but time now," I told her. "And this isn't just about money. It's about justice." After weeks of gathering evidence and building our case, I finally worked up the courage to confront Andrew directly. With Patricia's guidance, I called him from her office with the conversation recorded for potential legal use. His voice was casual when he answered. "Mom, how are you settling in? How could you do this to me?" The question burst from me, all pretense of small talk impossible. "Do what set you up somewhere safe and appropriate. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" My voice shook. "You sold my home, stole my money, and left me with nothing. You betrayed everything your father and I ever taught you." Andrew's tone changed instantly, cold and dismissive. "You're being dramatic. You're an old woman who can't take care of herself anymore. I made responsible decisions." "Responsible?" I nearly shouted. "You bought yourself a mansion in Florida with my money." "Money that would have been mine eventually anyway," he retorted. "Why should I wait until you're dead? This way Jessica and I can enjoy it while we're young. You've had your life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This couldn't be the boy I'd raised, the child Robert and I had loved unconditionally. The ranch was never meant to be sold. It was our legacy, something to pass down through generations. Andrew laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "That rundown ranch, please. It was sitting on valuable land that you and Dad were too sentimental to capitalize on. I did what should have been done years ago." I heard a woman's voice in the background, then Jessica came on the line. "Maribel, you're being incredibly selfish right now. Andy has worked so hard taking care of everything for you. You should be grateful for the apartment. Most people your age are in nursing homes." Their united front against me was stunning. These were people I'd welcomed into my family, treated as my own. Now they were strangers with familiar voices. "I'm meeting with lawyers," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What you did wasn't just wrong, it was illegal." Andrew's response chilled me to the bone. "Try it, Mom. One word from me about your mental state after that concussion, and you'll find yourself declared incompetent faster than you can blink." Who do you think the courts will believe? A confused old woman or her successful businessman's son who only wants what's best for her? Is that a threat? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It's reality. You're past your expiration date anyway. Just be grateful for what you have and stay out of my way. The call ended with those words hanging between us. Past my expiration date. In Andrew's eyes, I was already obsolete, worthless, except for the assets he could strip from me. I broke down in Patricia's office, the full weight of the betrayal crushing me. It wasn't just the ranch or the money. It was the realization that my own child viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle to the wealth he felt entitled to. Every memory I cherished of Andrew's childhood now felt tainted, called into question. Had I ever truly known him at all? That night in my sparse apartment was the darkest of my life. Darker even than when Robert died, because then I'd had purpose, continuity, and most importantly, faith in the goodness of our son. Now I had nothing but four walls in a place that would never feel like home. I found myself holding Robert's wedding ring, the one keepsake Andrew had allowed me to keep. "What do I do now?" I whispered, as if Robert might somehow answer. "Everything we built is gone." Unable to sleep, I rummaged through the boxes Andrew had brought, searching for anything that might comfort me. At the bottom of one box, I found Robert's old journal, a leather-bound book he'd kept during our early years on the ranch. I opened it randomly, and through my tears read his words from 30 years earlier. "Tough day today. Lost 2 calves to the cold, and nearly lost my own fingers fixing the north fence in this weather. Maribel keeps our spirits up somehow. She has this unshakable belief that anything broken can be fixed, any setback overcome. When I married her, I thought I was the strong one. Now I know better. Her kind of strength doesn't announce itself with noise and swagger. It shows up in persistence in refusing to be beaten by circumstances. Thank God for that strength. We'll need it for the journey ahead." Reading Robert's words, something shifted inside me. The ranch itself might be gone, but the woman who built it wasn't. The strength Robert had recognized in me 40 years ago was still there, buried beneath grief and betrayal. I might never recover the property itself, but I could still fight for justice. I could ensure Andrew faced consequences for what he'd done, not just to me, but potentially to others. If he'd done this to his own mother, what else might he be capable of? By morning, I had made a decision. This fight wasn't just about recovery anymore. It was about ensuring Andrew couldn't do this to anyone else. It was about standing up for all the vulnerable seniors who might face similar betrayals from those they trusted most. I might have lost my home, but I refused to lose my dignity or my purpose. With new clarity, I called Patricia. "I want to pursue everything. Civil action, criminal charges, whatever it takes. Even if I never get the ranch back, even if recovery is minimal, I want him to face consequences." "It won't be easy," she warned again. "These cases rarely are." "Neither was building a ranch from nothing," I replied. "But Robert and I did that. I'm not afraid of hard things." What I didn't expect was the support that would emerge from unexpected places. Teresa, the nurse who had helped me at the rehabilitation center, set up a crowdfunding page for my legal expenses after hearing what had happened. Former neighbors and community members I hadn't seen in months began reaching out, offering testimonials about my mental capacity and long-standing plans for the ranch. The community I thought I'd lost was rallying around me in ways I never anticipated. For the first time since discovering Andrew's betrayal, I felt something beyond grief and rage. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was the beginning of something new. A purpose. A path forward. I might have lost everything material, but I was discovering that my identity ran deeper than property or possessions. I was still Maribel Johnson. Still the woman who had built something from nothing once before. And perhaps I could do so again in a different way. As word of my situation spread through our small community, support materialized in unexpected ways. My former ranch hands came forward with information about Andrew's activities during my hospitalization. Several recalled him inventorying equipment and assets months before the sale, always when I wasn't present. Others described him bringing prospective buyers to tour the property while telling them I was resting or at appointments. Patricia filed motions to freeze Andrew's assets pending investigation, though we knew much of the money was likely already spent. She also arranged meetings with the district attorney's office to discuss potential criminal charges. The DA is interested, she told me. Financial elder abuse cases are increasing, and they're looking to make examples. Local news picked up the story. I was reluctant at first to speak publicly about such a painful personal betrayal, but Patricia convinced me that publicity might help our case and potentially warn others. The headline read, "Local rancher's son accused of selling family legacy while mother recovered from accident." The article included a photo of me standing with Robert on our front porch years earlier, both of us smiling with the mountains in the background. The response was immediate. Emails and calls flooded Patricia's office from people offering support or sharing similar stories. Andrew called in a rage after the article appeared. "You're trying to ruin me," he snarled. "Take down that story or you'll regret it." "Is that another threat?" I asked, calmly recording the call as Patricia had instructed. "It's a promise. Nobody will believe you anyway. You're just a bitter old woman making up stories because you can't accept that your time is over." His words no longer had the power to wound me as deeply. Every cruel statement simply reinforced that I was doing the right thing by fighting back. Former business associates began distancing themselves from Andrew as the story spread. His carefully cultivated image as a successful ethical businessman was crumbling under scrutiny. Through legal discovery, we learned he had used similar tactics with an elderly uncle years earlier, convincing him to sign over valuable stocks while hospitalized. The pattern was established. The legal process moved slowly, as Patricia had warned. Each day brought new challenges. The bank that had processed the transfers claimed they had followed proper protocols. The title company that handled the ranch sale insisted all paperwork appeared legitimate. Andrew hired expensive attorneys who filed motion after motion to delay proceedings and drain my limited resources. During this period, I found unexpected allies. The bank manager, who had handled our ranch accounts for 20 years, came forward describing Andrew's suspicious behavior in the weeks following my accident. He kept asking about transfer limits and how quickly large sums could be moved between accounts, she recalled in her deposition. It didn't seem right, but he had the power of attorney paperwork. Most surprisingly, I discovered other victims of Andrew's schemes. Through the legal process, we uncovered evidence that he had convinced several elderly investors to put money into non-existent business ventures. The district attorney's office began building a larger case beyond just my situation. I found myself becoming an accidental advocate. Other seniors facing similar situations reached out for advice or simply to share their stories. With Teresa's help, I started a small support group that met weekly in the community room of my apartment complex. Sharing our experiences and strategies became therapeutic for all of us. The emotional toll was substantial. Some days, the legal battle consumed me entirely, leaving no energy for anything else. Other days, grief would overwhelm me unexpectedly. Seeing a photo of the ranch online with the new owner's children playing in fields where Andrew once played, or driving past a cattle auction where Robert and I had spent countless Saturdays. Those moments still brought tears, but they no longer paralyzed me. The physical demands were challenging too. My hip continued to heal, but slowly. I pushed myself in physical therapy, determined to regain as much independence as possible. My therapist remarked on my unusual motivation. "Most patients your age with similar injuries don't push this hard," she said during one particularly grueling session. "Most patients my age haven't had their lives stolen," I replied, completing another painful repetition. "I need to be strong enough to take back what I can." As months passed, my sparse apartment began to feel more like a base of operations than a reminder of what I'd lost. The walls that had once seemed to close in on me now held case files, timelines, and research. The community I'd found in my support group brought unexpected warmth to my new circumstances. When funds from the crowdfunding campaign began running low, local ranchers organized a benefit auction and dinner. The event raised enough to cover legal expenses for months. Standing before the crowd that night, I was overcome by the contrast between Andrew's betrayal and the generosity of neighbors and even strangers. "Thank you isn't adequate," I told them, my voice breaking. "When I lost the ranch, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, but you've all reminded me that community can't be sold off or stolen. It lives in connections between people who stand by each other when it matters most." The road ahead remained uncertain. Patricia was candid about the challenges we still faced. Even with mounting evidence of fraud, recovering significant assets would be difficult. The new owners of the ranch had purchased legally unaware of the circumstances. The money Andrew hadn't already spent was likely hidden in accounts we hadn't yet discovered. Yet something had changed in me. The woman who had collapsed in grief upon discovering her son's betrayal had been replaced by someone stronger, someone determined not just to survive, but to create meaning from this painful chapter. Each small victory in court, each person who found hope through our support group each day, I managed to stand a little straighter with my healing hip. These became the measurements of a life rebuilding itself from ruins. "We have enough to go to trial," Patricia announced one afternoon, 6 months into our legal battle. "The DA is moving forward with criminal charges, and our civil case is solid. Are you ready to face him in court?" I thought about the decades Robert and I had spent building something meaningful, the values we thought we'd passed on the son who had rejected everything we stood for. "I've been ready since the day I discovered what he did," I told her. "Let's finish this." Nearly a year after discovering Andrew's betrayal, I walked into the county courthouse for the beginning of the trial. Patricia had prepared me extensively for what to expect, but nothing could fully ready me for seeing my son across a courtroom now as an adversary rather than family. Andrew sat beside his attorney in an expensive suit, his expression carefully neutral. Jessica wasn't present. They'd separated months earlier when the full extent of his activities came to light, and charges expanded beyond just my case. He didn't look at me as I entered, though I studied him openly. This person who shared my blood had become a stranger to me, someone I no longer recognized. The courtroom was more crowded than expected. Many faces from my support group were present, along with former neighbors and ranch employees. David and Lisa Thornton, the new ranch owners, had come to testify about their interactions with Andrew during the purchase. Local media occupied the back row, this case having become something of a cause célèbre in our community. Opening arguments laid bare the stark contrast in our positions. Andrew's attorney portrayed him as a concerned son making difficult decisions for an aging mother whose judgment had been compromised by injury. He painted me as confused, resentful, and unable to accept the realities of aging. My cognitive state after the concussion featured prominently in his narrative, as did carefully selected medical notes suggesting I might not have been capable of managing my affairs. Patricia's opening was measured but devastating. She detailed the timeline of Andrew's actions, the evidence of planning that predated my accident, the discrepancies in signatures, and the clear paper trail showing how he had systematically transferred my assets to himself. "This case is not about a son making hard choices for his mother's benefit," she told the jury. "It's about calculated theft from someone in a vulnerable position by the very person who should have been protecting her interests." The trial proceeded methodically over the next 2 weeks. Medical experts testified about my cognitive state following the injury, with my doctors confirming that while I experienced temporary confusion, there was no evidence of permanent impairment that would justify the wholesale transfer of my assets. Financial experts outlined how Andrew had moved money through multiple accounts before purchasing his Florida property, a pattern consistent with attempting to obscure the paper trail. Former ranch employees described Andrew's unusual behavior in the months before and after my accident. My support group members testified about my current mental clarity and capacity. The Thorntons recounted their interactions with Andrew, including his false representations about my wishes regarding the ranch sale. Throughout it all, I noticed Andrew becoming increasingly agitated. His composed facade cracked as witness after witness contradicted his narrative. He whispered furiously to his attorney, his face flushing with anger when particularly damaging testimony emerged. The confident man who had threatened me over the phone was visibly crumbling under scrutiny. When it came time for me to testify, Patricia had prepared me extensively. "Speak your truth clearly and directly," she advised. "Don't let emotion overwhelm your testimony, but don't hide your pain either. The jury needs to see both your clarity and the impact of his actions." Taking the stand, I faced the courtroom with a straight back despite my still healing hip. I told the story from the beginning. The decades Robert and I spent building the ranch our dreams for its future, the accident that left me vulnerable, and the gradual discovery of Andrew's betrayal. I described the moment I realized everything was gone, the physical illness that overcame me, the disorienting grief of losing not just my home, but my trust in my only child. "Mrs. Johnson," the prosecutor asked, "did you ever authorize your son to sell your ranch or transfer the proceeds to himself?" "Never," I said firmly. "That ranch represented 45 years of my life with Robert. It was never for sale at any price." Andrew's attorney attempted to undermine my testimony by highlighting inconsistencies in my recollections immediately following the accident, suggesting that my current memories might be equally unreliable. He questioned whether I was truly capable of managing the ranch alone at my age, implying Andrew had acted out of genuine concern rather than greed. "Mrs. Johnson," he asked with artificial sympathy, "isn't it possible that your son was simply trying to ensure you had appropriate care after a serious injury, and that your pride is making it difficult to accept help?" I looked directly at Andrew as I answered. If my son had been concerned about my welfare, he would have discussed options with me once I had recovered. He would have respected my wishes regarding the home and land his father and I built. He would not have forged my signature, emptied my accounts, and threatened me when I questioned him. Those are not the actions of a caring son. They are the actions of someone who saw an opportunity to take what wasn't his. The jury's reaction was visible. Several members glanced at Andrew with newly critical eyes. One older woman nodded slightly as I spoke, perhaps seeing her own potential vulnerability in my situation. As the trial progressed, Andrew's defense crumbled further when financial records revealed he had consulted with real estate agents about the ranch's value months before my accident. His browser history showed searches for power of attorney limitations and selling property without owner consent. Most damning was an email to Jessica, where he wrote, "Once Mom's out of the picture, we can finally access the real value of that land." When Andrew finally took the stand, his earlier composure had completely evaporated. He contradicted himself repeatedly under cross-examination, growing defensive and eventually hostile. When Patricia presented evidence of his other financial schemes targeting elderly individuals, he lost his temper, entirely snapping, "They should have been more careful who they trusted." The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning their verdict. Andrew was found guilty on multiple counts, including fraud, financial elder abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty. The judge's sentencing statement was scathing. "The court views elder financial abuse as particularly reprehensible, Mr. Johnson, but when perpetrated against one's own parent, it represents a fundamental betrayal of trust and family bonds. You exploited your mother's vulnerability following a serious injury not for her benefit, but to enrich yourself at her expense. This court sentences you to 8 years in state prison and orders restitution in the full amount of assets converted for personal use." I felt no joy watching my son being led away in handcuffs, just a profound sadness for what might have been. The Robert and I had raised him to be better than this. Somewhere along the way, we had failed him, or he had failed himself. Either way, this moment represented the final severing of our family bonds. The restitution order was significant on paper, but Patricia had prepared me for the reality recovering the full amount would be difficult. Andrew had spent lavishly in the months before his arrest. The Florida property would be sold and his remaining assets liquidated, but it would represent only a fraction of what had been taken. The ranch itself remained with the Thorntons. They had purchased in good faith, and unwinding that transaction was neither legally feasible, nor I realized what I truly wanted anymore. They were caring for the land, responsibly raising their children with the values of stewardship that Robert and I had held dear. During the trial, Lisa had whispered to me, "Your legacy lives on there, just in a different form than you imagined." 3 months after the trial concluded, I received the first restitution payment, enough to purchase a small 2-bedroom house near my old community. It wasn't the ranch, but it was mine free and clear. I planted a garden in the backyard with some of Robert's favorite flowers and hung our old family photos on the walls. It began to feel like a home, if a different one, than I had envisioned for my later years. The support group I had started continued to grow, eventually becoming an official nonprofit organization advocating for stronger elder protection laws. I found myself speaking at community centers and senior residences, sharing my experience to help others recognize warning signs of financial exploitation. This new purpose brought unexpected fulfillment. 6 months after moving into my new home, I asked the Thorntons if I might visit the ranch. They welcomed me warmly, understanding the emotional significance. Walking those familiar fields was both painful and healing. The land itself remained unchanged despite new owners. The distant mountains still framed the property exactly as they had for decades. The creek still followed its familiar path. Lisa walked with me to the old oak tree where Robert and I had often watched sunsets. "We kept this bench," she said, gesturing to the weathered wooden seat Robert had built. "It seemed important somehow." Sitting there looking out over the property that had once been the center of my world, I felt a surprising sense of peace. The ranch would never be mine again, but it continued to exist, to be loved, to support life and growth. That wasn't nothing. My relationship with Andrew was irrevocably broken. He made no attempts to contact me from prison, and I made none to reach him. The gulf between us had grown too wide, the betrayal too fundamental. Yet I refused to let bitterness consume the rest of my life. The energy once spent on anger now fueled my advocacy work instead. The foundation I established with the remainder of the restitution funds focused on providing emergency legal assistance to seniors facing financial exploitation. We named it Second Chapter Foundation, reflecting both my personal journey and the opportunities for renewal that can emerge from even the most devastating losses. Looking back from the vantage point of 3 years since that terrible day of discovery, I marvel at how differently my life turned out than I had planned. The ranch that was supposed to be my forever home is gone. The son I thought would carry on our legacy is estranged. Yet I've found purpose, community, and even joy in this unexpected third act. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that our identities run deeper than our possessions or even our relationships. What truly defines us is how we respond when everything we thought was certain is suddenly swept away. Do we collapse under the weight of loss, or do we find the courage to begin again? I chose to begin again. Not because I'm extraordinary, but because the alternative, surrendering to despair, would have meant that Andrew took not just my property, but my spirit as well. And that was the one thing I refused to let him have. So, if you're facing your own moment of devastating loss or betrayal, know this: it is possible to build something meaningful from the ruins. It won't be what you had before. It might not be what you would have chosen. But it can still be a life worth living, a legacy worth creating. Have you ever faced a betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story touched something in you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and renewal. Remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when we think we've lost everything. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to write your own next chapter, whatever challenges you might face.